All right, welcome to the deep dive.
Mm.
Today, we're going to be really diving deep into a question that, well, kind of hits close to home for everyone listening. We're talking about you, your brain,
Hmm.
and the whole intelligence and creativity thing.
Hmm.
I mean, for so long, right, there's been this idea, almost like a cultural thing, where you're either the brainy type, all logic and no, imagination, or you're the artsy type, super creative, but maybe not killing it on those standardized tests.
Right.
And it wasn't just a feeling people had. There was some serious research behind it too.
Yeah.
Like I was looking at this study by Kim back in 2005 where they looked at a ton of other research, a meta-analysis, I think it's called.
Yeah, meta-analysis.
And even that suggested there was only a small connection.
Yeah, that's been the thinking for quite a while, actually, that these were pretty separate abilities. And, all those major studies and reviews of the research, they seem to support that idea too. Like intelligence, it was all about finding that one right answer. Convergent thinking, they called it.
Right.
While creativity was about, all those different possibilities, divergent thinking. So, yeah, it really seemed like there were two different things.
Okay, so like separate corners of the brain kind of thing. But what's so interesting, and this is what we're going to really unpack today, is that more recent research, it's starting to suggest, well, maybe intelligence and creativity aren't such strangers after all. We're
Exactly.
going to explore this whole shift in thinking, how new research is actually pointing to a much closer relationship between intelligence and creativity than we initially thought.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a bunch of cool stuff to look at today, how these ideas developed over time, the history, latest theories, new ways we're measuring these abilities, and some really powerful statistical tools that are giving us a whole new perspective.
Absolutely. We'll be tracing that conversation, starting with some of the key work that kind of set the stage for uh, this initial idea of them being separate.
So let's rewind a bit, shall we?
Yeah.
Back in time to, one of the early names that always comes up is Guilford. I think it's 1967. He had this structure of intellect model.
Yeah, Guilford. He was really ahead of his time in a way because he actually tried to put intelligence and creativity together, within the same framework.
Hmm.
And his SOI model, it suggested all these different intellectual abilities.
Yeah.
But crucially, he made this distinction between convergent thinking, that's, leading to that one specific answer, and divergent thinking, which was about generating lots of ideas.
Mhm.
And that was really seen as the core of creativity.
Okay, so even though the SOI model, it's not like the main way we think about intelligence today, right?
Mm.
It was really important because it gave us these terms, convergent, divergent, and kind of got researchers thinking about how to design tasks to measure divergent thinking specifically.
Oh, absolutely.
So it kind of set the stage for everything that came after.
Yeah, for sure. And, one of the early studies that really pushed this idea that intelligence and creativity were separate, it was by Getzels and Jackson back in 62.
62. Okay.
Yeah, they worked with middle and high school students,
Hmm.
and they divided them into groups based on whether they, scored high or low on intelligence tests and on creativity tasks.
Okay.
And their argument was that you could have students who were really creative but didn't necessarily ace those IQ tests and, vice versa.
So highlighting those groups that seem to have one without the other, but were there any questions raised about how they did this?
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of the big criticisms, it had to do with how they were actually measuring creativity.
Okay.
When researchers later looked closely at their study, to see if their creativity tasks were really measuring the same underlying thing, it seemed like they weren't always. In fact, sometimes those creativity tasks, they correlated just as strongly with their intelligence measures as they did with each other.
Oh, interesting.
So it kind of muddied the waters a bit.
Yeah, yeah. So that clear separation they were arguing for, it maybe wasn't so clear when you really got into the weeds of their methods.
Yeah.
Now, another really influential study from around that time was by Wallach and Kogan in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
And this one seems to have had a pretty lasting impact on how we thought about creativity and how we assess it.
Absolutely. Wallach and Kogan, they were all about how unique the responses were in these divergent thinking tasks.
Mhm.
They'd ask kids to come up with different uses for, everyday objects.
Okay.
And then they would score these responses based on two things: fluency, so that's the total number of ideas, and uniqueness, which is how many of those ideas were, original, not given by anyone else in the group.
And this whole uniqueness thing, this became a really big deal, right? It felt like this very, like, objective, concrete way to see how original someone was being.
It did. It did. Now, Guilford, he had used similar methods before, but Wallach and Kogan, they kind of simplified the process,
Hmm.
smaller set of tasks, easier to, give and score. And they found that their intelligence measures, they seem to be measuring one thing, and their creativity measures, they also seem to hang together. But the correlation between the two, it was low, around R 0.09, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay. So that's pretty low.
Yeah. And at the time, it seemed like, pretty strong evidence that they were indeed, separate abilities.
Yeah, I can see why that would be, like, convincing. A correlation to 0.09, that's, not a whole lot of overlap. So their work had this huge impact on how people thought about this. And you mentioned that this whole scoring based on uniqueness, that became, like, super popular.
Oh, for sure.
Why?
Because it seemed, objective, straightforward. And researchers for years, they relied heavily on this approach, especially when they used divergent thinking tasks or similar ones you'd find in the Torrance tests of creative thinking, the TTCT.
Right.
Those became kind of standard in the field.
Okay, so we've got this period where the research is saying, yeah, intelligence, creativity, they're pretty much doing their own thing in your head.
Ah.
And even that big meta-analysis by Kim in 2005 found only a modest connection.
Hmm.
So it seemed like case closed, right?
Right. Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
something happens. The story shifts. What caused this reevaluation?
Well, around the same time as Kim's work, a bunch of researchers, they started to suspect maybe, we weren't seeing the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, there's been this real shift in thinking,
Okay.
with more agreement that intelligence and creativity, they might actually be more related than we thought.
Okay.
And this reevaluation, it's been driven by, advancements in a few key areas.
Yeah, let's get into those. What were some of the big things that changed how we're understanding all this? You mentioned statistical tools being one.
Yeah. For a long time, studies, they just looked at basic correlations
Hmm.
between scores on intelligence tests and creativity tests. But more recently, there's been this wider use of more sophisticated statistical models,
Yeah.
particularly what are called latent variable models.
Latent variable models. Okay,
Yeah.
for those of us who, don't spend all day thinking about statistics,
Right.
can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. Think of it like this. When we try to measure, something like creativity or intelligence with a test, there's always going to be some like error,
Hmm.
some noise in our measurements.
Okay.
And latent variable models, they're statistical tools that help researchers separate that true underlying ability from that measurement error. It's like, imagine trying to hear a faint radio signal, but there's all the static.
Right.
These models, they help us filter out the static
Okay.
so we can actually hear the signal.
Mm.
So we're getting a clearer signal of what's really going on. Exactly. And by, getting a better handle on those core abilities themselves, we can get a more accurate idea of how they relate to each other.
Okay, so we're cutting through the noise to see the real connection.
Mm-hmm.
And you had an example from the Wallach and Kogan study, right?
Yeah. When Sylvia reanalyzed their data, using structural equation models, which are a type of latent variable modeling, the correlation between intelligence and creativity, well, it jumped from that initial R 0.09 all the way up to around R 0.20.
Whoa. Okay, so more than double,
Yeah.
just from looking at the numbers differently.
Exactly. It shows how those older, simpler correlations, they might have been underestimating the real connection
Because of all that noise.
because of the measurement error. Yeah.
Okay, fascinating.
Yeah.
So better statistical tools suggesting a closer link. What about how we actually assess creativity? You said there were some advances there too.
Yeah, well, remember how we talked about that uniqueness scoring method from Wallach and Kogan, how influential that was? Well, over time, some pretty serious problems with that approach have come up.
What?
For one, it turns out that fluency, just, how many responses someone gives, it's super strongly linked to uniqueness.
Okay.
If you come up with more ideas, you naturally have a higher chance of saying something no one else in your group has thought of.
Makes sense.
And when researchers re-examined Wallach and Kogan's data, they found this really high correlation between fluency and uniqueness. It was R 0.89.
Well, okay.
And if you look at the Torrance tests, similar story, a correlation around 0.88. So that uniqueness score, it might mostly just be reflecting how many ideas someone came up with, not necessarily how original or, high quality those ideas actually were.
Yeah, it's kind of a problem if your main way of measuring creativity is just like counting how many things someone says.
Right. And there's another big problem. Uniqueness scoring, It depends on the size of the group you're testing.
Oh, okay.
Because uniqueness is defined by, how many other people in your sample gave the same response.
Right.
The larger your sample, the less likely any single response is going to be unique. So
Hmm.
someone could appear less creative just because they're in a bigger group.
Wow. So, like, the same person could take the test with, like, 5 other people and then 100 other people,
Mm-hmm.
and their score would change.
Yeah, potentially.
That seems like a big flaw.
It is, and it means that a test like that, it's not really giving you a consistent picture of an individual's creativity.
Right. So if this way of scoring uniqueness is, well, kind of problematic,
Yeah.
what's the alternative?
Well, there's been this renewed interest in using subjective ratings of creativity.
Okay.
Guilford, in his early work, he actually used tasks where trained raters would judge responses based on things like, how clever or novel they were.
Mm.
And he found those ratings quite useful.
Okay.
And later, Amabile, she developed this further with her consensual assessment technique, the CAT-T, for evaluating creative products.
Subjective ratings, though, that sounds like it could be, influenced by personal opinions, right?
That's a good point. And that's why these methods usually involve multiple raters and they have clear guidelines for what they're looking for.
Right.
But surprisingly, these subjective ratings, they've been pretty valuable in understanding creativity.
Mm.
Studies have shown they don't correlate much with fluency, which, solves that problem we saw with uniqueness scoring.
Right.
And they're not as affected by the group size. And maybe most importantly, they tend to show stronger connections with intelligence compared to those uniqueness scores.
Interesting. So when we move beyond just counting unique responses and start actually like judging the quality, the creativity of the ideas themselves, that link with intelligence starts to become more clear.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you also mentioned this executive era in
Right.
psychology and how it's influencing this whole intelligence creativity thing. What's that all about?
So since the 1960s, our understanding of, executive processes in the brain has grown a lot.
Right.
These are things like your working memory, ability to focus, ignore distractions, control your thinking. And researchers started realizing that these executive abilities, they might be really important for both intelligent thought and creative thought.
So it's not just about having the ideas, but like how you manage them, shape them.
Exactly. For example, there was this study by Gilhooly and colleagues back in 2007. They looked at the strategies people used when they were doing divergent thinking tasks. And they found that the people who came up with better, more creative responses, they tended to use more abstract and controlled strategies. It wasn't just random brainstorming.
Right.
There was this, executive control involved.
That makes sense, right? Like
Yeah.
to get to those really novel ideas, you got to be able to like explore different paths, but also maybe like stop yourself from going down the less promising one.
Exactly, precisely. And this led to studies using, latent variable models based on the CHC model of cognitive
The
abilities.
CHC model. Okay.
Yeah, the Cattell-Horn-Carroll model. And this model, it provides this family tree of intelligence.
Okay.
You've got general intelligence at the top, then broader abilities like fluid intelligence, crystallized intelligence, visual spatial abilities, and then more specific abilities below those.
Okay. A family tree of intelligence.
Yeah.
So how does this model help us understand the whole intelligence creativity connection?
Well, by breaking down intelligence into these different parts, we can see which specific abilities are most strongly related to creativity. For instance, a lot of our research has focused on fluid intelligence,
Okay.
which involves things like reasoning and executive control. And we found that fluid intelligence, it's a strong predictor of how creative the responses are when people do unusual uses tasks, as judged by, those subjective ratings we talked about.
Right.
And other researchers, they found similar results, showing links between fluid intelligence and the originality of ideas.
Okay.
We even found some evidence that this connection is partly due to something called executive switching.
Executive switching. What's that?
It's your ability to shift between different categories of ideas during a creative task. And people who are higher in fluid intelligence, they seem to be better at this kind of mental flexibility.
So being able to switch between different approaches, that's important for both fluid intelligence and being creative.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Yeah.
But it's not just fluid intelligence that matters.
Right.
Research has also highlighted broad retrieval ability.
Broad retrieval. Okay.
Yeah, which is about how well you can access and pull information from your long-term memory, things like verbal fluency. And several studies have shown that this ability, it also has a big impact on divergent thinking.
Okay.
And these effects, they're separate from those of fluid and crystallized intelligence. So it's not just about generating a lot of ideas, but about how you use your knowledge creatively.
It sounds like we're getting this more detailed picture of how different parts of intelligence
Yeah.
contribute to different parts of creativity. And you said this goes beyond just those divergent thinking tasks.
Absolutely. Researchers have looked at other forms of creative expression, like how people generate metaphors.
Okay.
Studies showing that fluid intelligence, it's a strong predictor of how creative those metaphors are.
Hmm.
And when you include other CHC abilities like crystallized intelligence, and broad retrieval, you can explain a good chunk of why some people are better at this than others. Even tasks where you have to complete a metaphor, they show this strong link with fluid intelligence.
That's fascinating. So it's like that ability to make those novel connections, to see things in new ways, that seems key to both fluid intelligence and coming up with metaphors. What about humor? Is intelligence involved there?
That's an interesting one. It's a smaller area of research, but several studies have found that both fluid and crystallized intelligence play a role in how well people produce humor.
Right.
Things like writing funny captions for cartoons, coming up with punchlines. Seems like both your ability to think abstractly and your knowledge of language and social norms, they contribute.
It's really cool how this is all painting a picture of intelligence and creativity being way more connected than we thought across all these different creative tasks.
Yeah.
And you also touched on the brain science behind this.
Yeah. So cognitive neuroscience of creativity, it's a growing field.
Mhm.
And it's supporting this closer relationship. It's complex, but a lot of studies using techniques like EEG and fMRI, they found strong evidence that those executive processes, they're involved in coming up with creative ideas,
Okay.
whether it's divergent thinking, metaphors, even improvising music. These studies often show activity in brain regions and networks that we know are involved in executive control when people are doing creative things.
Mhm.
So it's more support for the idea that intelligence, especially those executive aspects, play a big role in creativity.
Okay, so from re-examining the stats to new ways of assessing creativity and now brain research, it really seems like the understanding has shifted.
It has.
We're moving away from this whole separate idea. So what does this new understanding mean for, us in the real world?
One big implication is how we think about intelligence and creativity. The old idea, it kind of limited both. It
Oh,
made intelligence just about right answers, ignoring things like flexible thinking, even imagination.
right.
And it made creativity seem almost magical instead of something you could develop.
Hmm.
But by recognizing how connected they are, we get a more complete picture of both.
That makes sense. If intelligence is more than just facts and clear-cut problems, and creativity is more than just like random imagination, then the overlap is way more obvious.
Yeah.
What about the creative process itself? How has our thinking on that changed?
Traditionally, the focus was on your existing knowledge.
Hmm.
Theories focused on having a wide network of associations in your memory. And while knowledge is important,
Yeah.
the newer research highlights that how you use that knowledge is critical. The focus is shifting to those fluid and executive abilities, how you manipulate information, make connections, transform your knowledge. It makes creativity more like other cognitive processes, like problem solving, making judgments, decisions.
So having the raw materials isn't enough. You got to have the tools to work with them.
Exactly.
This also impacts how we assess creativity, especially in education.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Divergent thinking tests, they've been used a lot to identify gifted students. And in the past, one reason was that they didn't correlate highly with intelligence tests.
Mhm.
The idea was they were tapping into something different. But as we realize the connection is stronger, that justification weakens.
Hmm.
But there are still good reasons to assess creativity, like evidence that these assessments might be less biased.
Okay.
And the fact that flexible thinking is so important these days. The key is we need a broader view of intelligence, one that includes both those convergent and divergent aspects, along with things like motivation, openness to new experiences.
It sounds like we need to rethink how we identify and support creative potential in school, maybe move beyond just those traditional tests.
Yeah, and we should also take a closer look at some of the commercial creativity tests out there, like the TTC, which still rely a lot on how many ideas someone can come up with.
Yeah.
That might not be the whole picture anymore.
Right.
But the good news is this growing understanding gives us opportunities to develop new ways of thinking about these abilities and better tools for measuring creative potential.
This has been so insightful. We started with this idea of intelligence and creativity being separate, but now, thanks to all this new research, we're seeing how connected they truly are.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey, and it shows how our understanding keeps evolving.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to ponder.
Hmm.
How might this revised understanding change how you approach your own personal growth? How might it change how we teach and learn, or how we encourage innovation in different fields? What could it mean for you to nurture both these seemingly intertwined mental strengths? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.